Hey everyone, Jay here. Just wanted to quickly mention that for the month of May, you can get 50% off any of my on-demand courses or videos. That includes my Yoga Modules Continuing Education course, my online workshop, Gentle is the New Advanced, and my self-practice video series. For the month of May, you can get 50% off by using promo code MAY50 at checkout. That's promo code MAY50 for 50% off any on-demand videos. To take advantage of it, go to jbrownyoga.com. All right, here we are. This is Jay Brown Yoga Talks podcast. My name is Jay Brown. And I hope that in this moment in which the sound of my voice is now meeting your ear, you're feeling reasonably well. If this happens to be your first time listening, let me welcome you. Everyone else, what's up? How was your week? How are things going? I know some of you have been listening of late and hearing me trying to assess that very question. How are things going? Not just for me in my own little sphere, but in the broader industry of yoga. And I would say that it seems like there are some things emerging, some models of where it's working and how it's working in certain kind of ways. And what is the scale and where are the markets kind of a thing, or what's viable given the sort of contraction that's happened. And there definitely has been a contraction. I don't know if you were listening last week, but we were talking about that some, and there's certainly been some contraction. Speaking of last week, if you were here and you heard me talking about my new gig, I have a little bit of an update, but I'm going to save it for the other side of today's talk. So if you want to get an update on that, you can tune into the other side of today's conversation. But I'm mentioning all this also because I know that there are also a lot of you listening who are less interested in that stuff. And I just want to let you know that we're going to go back to some of the yoga philosophy that is the mainstay of this show. And I really need to talk about God some more. I know that was a controversial area I got into, but I need to go back to talking about God again. So we're going to do that soon enough if you're interested in that. But I am still on this assessing the situation and wanting to talk to different people who are out there doing different stuff. And specifically, if people are managing to do things in a more old school way. Because I've been trying to run this yoga center I opened 7 months ago in the old school way, and it is partly working and maybe not. I can't tell yet. And I'm probably going to make a few little changes, which I'll mention that on the other side too, if you want to get an update on some of the things I'm thinking about doing with the center. But it's been super important for me to talk to different perspectives, different sort of teachers in different kinds of situations. And today, we're going to look at what I consider to be a perfect example of what I would call an old school teacher. And her name is Judith Valerie. And Judith and I have a mutual friend, and I talk about that a little bit at the very beginning of our conversation, so I won't give that away. But it was just so perfect in terms of its timing, and for me wanting to find models of teachers who have held it down all these years and continue to do so in a way that I find very affirming and important. So it was wonderful to get a chance to speak with Judith, and I'm very happy to be sharing it with you today. Real quick before we get to it, let me mention that if you feel like you're getting something from this show, perhaps you'd consider supporting it with a podcast premium subscription. just in case you were not aware, on the public feed of this show, the most recent 52 episodes are available in their full length, and the rest are first half free. But for as little as $5 a month, you could have a podcast premium subscription, which gives you access to all of the full-length episodes and is how this show continues to exist, because I'm not running any ads and it relies entirely on listener support. So please, if you are in a position to do so, perhaps you will be so kind as to make that gesture and become a podcast premium subscriber. There are also other ways for us to connect. If you want to take advantage of the current promotion of my on-demand videos, you can get 50% off if you use promo code May50. I've got on-demand videos and other stuff too. If you want to find any of my stuff, go to jbrownyoga.com. Okay, that's good enough for now. I will touch base with you on the other side, but let's go ahead and get to it. Let's listen to this conversation that I had with Judith Valerie. Hello?
Hi, Jay.
Hi, Judith. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
I don't know if you've listened to the show already, but we are already recording, and if it's okay with you, I'd like to consider ourselves having just begun.
Super, that's fine, yes.
Very good. Well, I'm glad to have this moment with you. Thank you so much for making this time, and I had a sense that maybe podcasting isn't a thing that you've done regularly, so I appreciate you making the effort to do this with me.
Well, it's actually the first ever podcast I've done. So I've done other things that have been recorded, but not just voice podcast. So
sure. Well, let me tell you why you're here, and that'll be good for anybody else who's listening to this. I mean, maybe you know this already, maybe you don't, but we have a mutual friend in Karina. Shout out to Karina.
Yes. Yes.
And I was sort of asking people that I've met online. I have like an online training that I do, and I was talking to people who were in that about, you know, what their experience of local classes was like, what their first yoga classes were like. You know, some people I'm meeting these days, their first yoga classes are online.
Right. Yes.
And, you know, just for you also just to know sort of like the history of this show. I mean, I started it in 2015. Mm-hmm. And at that time, I was in my 40s and I had a yoga center that I could no longer afford to pay the rent on.
Yes. Yes.
And, you know, I was trying to figure out like how I had gotten to where I had gotten. You know, I started in my 20s in the early 90s. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like in my 40s with 2 kids and like trying to figure out what the hell is going on.
Right.
And so that's when I started the show. And that was 10 years ago now.
Yeah.
So I was asking folks what their class was like. And Karina was telling me about you and your class. Mm-hmm. And it was like a blast from the past. It was like the old school way.
Yes, that's me. Very old-fashioned.
And it was just so refreshing to hear that you were out there and that it was still happening in that same way. So I was just interested to kind of meet you and hear some of your story, because I feel like that's kind of the best way to kind of flesh out how things have happened over all these years. So again, just thanks for doing this.
Well, I'd like to say that Karina is my youngest student, and she is the one that would come up after class and ask all these fascinating questions. And I thought, oh, there's a yoga teacher in the making here. And I haven't done yoga teacher training. I used to be a teacher and teacher of teachers, and I didn't want to be a yoga teacher. I just wasn't my calling. Anyway, when she told me that she'd found your class, I was happy. And then what's been lovely is you might have shared something with them in the teacher training, which she is loving, and we'd have a conversation about it, she and I. So that's made it juicy for me, because it's reminded me of things that I hadn't thought of in a while, or it's a new question that I hadn't ever pondered. So, yes, it's brought some fresh air into my teaching, and I love having Karina in the class. And she started coming to Kirtan with me, and delightful. So, yes, when I was thinking about this morning, I was thinking of the years that led up to teaching yoga and the years when I was a child, when I had some experiences, and I thought, oh, Jay probably wasn't alive then. Because I sort of forget how old I am sometimes. And so, yeah, I was thinking.
Well, tell me about that. Like, that's usually what I like to find out, because it does matter, like the time and like the early experiences someone has as a yoga teacher, like it shapes their viewpoint.
Right.
So you just mentioned some early childhood experiences.
Well, yes, I grew up in England with parents. Everybody I knew pretty much was an atheist. We all sang hymns in school every day, but I didn't have any role models of anybody who was, quote, religious. I didn't really know people that went to church.
Yeah.
And I had some experiences that I couldn't explain or understand, and didn't really think about them that much until I was doing this storytelling thing to celebrate 35 years of teaching. And then when I was pulling together different stories, I thought, oh, I'm going to go back to the beginning. And I'll tell you very briefly what they were. When I was a very young child, I don't know, 7, 6, looking into the coal fire, I was by myself, which was rare in my little house. And I was looking at the sparks in the fire, and I was drawn back. And I had this sense that time went back, before the kings and queens, before the dinosaurs, way back to some elemental something that was beyond that I didn't have words for. And it was a really strange feeling, but almost reassuring. And I never told anyone because I wouldn't have known what to say. And then the next clue that I might become a yogi was doing poses each summer at the seaside. I'd go out, onto the rocks, and I would make these big shapes based on this statue of Queen Boudica, which I'd seen in London. She was a first century warrior queen of the Iceni tribe fighting against the villagers. And this, Victorian England, there's this statue of her in London, huge, where she's on a chariot with horses rising up and a whip in one hand and a spear in the other, enormous. Well, I'd never seen a woman make that shape, teachers, cooking, speaking. And so I'd pretend I was Queen Boudica. I'd make these big shapes, and I felt so strong and powerful. And I wanted to have that feeling, which I really didn't as a little girl. And wasn't encouraged as a nice English little girl. So, but I loved that big feeling of spaciousness and strength, really. And then the last one was, briefly, I was playing in the garden one day, and I'd been on a swing, and I'd been singing, and I was looking at Mum's roses, and this, that, and the other. And suddenly the sun came out, and I got goosebumps, you'd say, all over me. And I ran into my mum, and I pulled her outside, and she's, oh, what is it, darling? What is it? And I said, and I guess I'd had enough hymns in school to, I knew the word God, but I said, Mummy, God's not in the sky. God's in everything. God's in the flowers and the trees and you and me. And she said, oh, darling, you're a pantheist. And she learned that word somewhere at school. Yeah. She was an atheist. And I said, oh, Mummy, what's a pantheist? And she said, it's someone who sees God in nature. And I grew 3 inches. It just I felt so like, yes. And so those were the 3 points when I was younger. And I was able to experience a lot of awe in beauty, but I didn't have words for it. So that was sort of what was underneath or inside. And then, I was socialized, and I grew up, and I was trained to be an English lady and rebelled against that and this, that, and the other. When I was 23, I had a really significant, I called it creative experience, because spirits were what my dad drank. I didn't really know anything about spiritual. This is way back. This is 1975.
Okay.
So anyway, I'll talk about it later if you're interested. But I had this experience with what I now know is Kundalini energy, and what I now know is third eye chakra opening. And I had no words for it. Transcendent, not in my body.
So this was when you were 23?
Correct. And I'll tell you more about that later, but I'd rather get on a little bit. But pull me back to that anytime.
I will.
So that was when I was 23, and I thought I can't be a school teacher by day and a disco queen by night any longer. There's more out there, and I wanted to go somewhere completely different from Europe. And I went over, I met this guy under the clock at Victoria Station in London with a dozen other people. We were all strangers. And he took us on trains and buses overland to India. It took a month to get there. We stayed in some of the cheapest hotels on the planet, I think. And then I traveled around India, Nepal, Sri Lanka with these 3 Australians. The 3 Australians did TM. And so they wanted to go to the TM ashram in Rishikesh. And I was like, oh, God, okay. Well, I was just along for the ride because I wasn't interested in meditation or yoga at that time. But I went with them, and I had one of my stories is about the monkey stealing my book on the train and doing all these funny things with the book and everything. So anyway, we went there, and I wasn't impressed. It was sort of like these caverns, places that people meditated. But anyway, that was my first exposure. And I guess the Beatles, I remember the Beatles getting off an aeroplane after they'd been to see the Swami, what was his name?
Yes, I've had some folks on to talk about this time and like the hashish trail and like the way to get to India. Like you say, it took several days and stuff,
I wasn't into hashish. I was very straight. In fact, I slept on my jeans to maintain the crease so nobody would think I was a hippie.
Wow.
So, yeah. And I stayed with families and went into some schools. Anyway, I spent that year traveling. On that trip, at the last place I went to, I met who would become my first husband, an American. He was working as underwater tour guide, living in a tent on the beach at Sharm el-Sheikh. And we got married in England, came to the States. And I met a group of black and white parents who wanted to start a public school based on the British elementary school, which is what I taught in, very progressive, child-centered. So instead of going to California like we'd planned, we ended up staying in Jackson, Mississippi. And so I worked really hard on this school, and then an arts ed program, and then back at the school when they got this big Magna Arts grant. So I was working really hard, and I was a total misfit because I at first didn't understand the white people or the black people. I mean, I was just polite to everybody, but I really worked hard at it. Lots of good colleagues and so on, lots of really great parents working together. But I was so stressed. And so that's when I went to a yoga class. And so the first line of one of my stories is, many people go to India to find their yoga teachers. I found mine in Jackson, Mississippi.
Well, just out of curiosity, I know we could probably do a whole other podcast on it maybe, but was there like a major culture clash between trying to bring what you did in Britain to America?
Oh, education-wise? Oh, my God. I was a crusader for progressive, child-centered education. It was really the parents.
I imagine that wasn't exactly a thing in Mississippi in the 70s.
But there was a very progressive group from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship.
Okay.
Of white people, and there were a lot of Jackson State black professors and families of professors who sort of got this going and went to the superintendent and made a big fuss, and then they drew people, and so people then came together around it. No, it was very unique. When my last job, when I was curriculum person there, people came from all over the country to see the school because it was so progressive by standards, and it's still International Baccalaureate School in Jackson, Mississippi, with like the highest grades and so forth.
Wow. Well, but it forced you into yoga classes, though, huh?
Well, it did. It did. And where it really ties into yoga, because I was so stressed out, was when I went to Janie's class. It was at the Y. There was no other yoga around. YWCA.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never read any spiritual material in my life. And she would read these, what she called seed thoughts, at the beginning of class or at the end of class. And one night when we were in Shavasana, she read this quote that just, again, burst out into goose pimples or goosebumps and had tears pouring down my face. And I'll tell you the quote in a minute, but it connected me with the experience I had, and it gave me a kind of container. It gave me a sense of, oh, this is it. This is what it is. Mm. And what she said was, deep within is a divine spark, an inner light, eternal, beyond space, beyond time, unbounded and free. This is the true self. I am this self am I. And when I heard that, it was like, oh, I didn't really know what I understood, but I understood something that was inherently mine. Mm. And so I went to teach, took classes with her for about 12 years. She was my mentor in so many ways.
And what was the practice like? What was
when I first went, she did what people would call hatha yoga, which was pretty basic, this and that, but not a lot of instruction. Mm. And I'd flow through things and I felt in heaven. And then she went off to take the Iyengar training. Mm-hmm. And she came back and I didn't like it at all. Mm. And I stopped going for a while, but then I had to go back. I went back and it was still Janie and she still did the seed thoughts at the end. And I began to understand the alignment and I began to know in my body the sense of it. Mm. And she was a very gentle, soft person. She could be fierce, but she was very kind. And so I guess because I was a teacher, any time that she was out, she'd have me sub. And then, so I took with her for about 12 years. And then in 89, I went to Santa Barbara and took the 10-day teacher training with Ganga White and Tracy Rich. Mm. Because it said comprehensive and there were no swamis involved. And I was very wary of that at that time. Stay tuned. It was a lot of Ashtanga yoga, lots of Chaturangas, and I got really, felt strong. But when I went back, I started a yoga class just at a church there, and nobody could do all the things I could do. Mm. So I had to be my elementary school teacher, yoga teacher, self, and modify things, find stepping stones, and create, like if you think of Virabhadrasana 3, Warrior 3, we had our arms out in T position and lift the back foot an inch, and I called it skater pose. So I had to invent a lot of simplifications, and I didn't focus on, quote, spiritual stuff, close quote. Mm-hmm. There was some pushback from some people at the church because there was a yoga class there. Mm-hmm. And so I got to the point where I felt absolutely done with my career path. And all I wanted was to do yoga. I wanted to have time in the morning for my practices because I was meditating by then. I wanted to create a whole different lifestyle. And so I created this sort of treasure map of little stick figures of me doing everything I wanted to do, put a little spark in the middle, which was my self-claimed spiritual symbol. And let's see, I think I went to Kripalu once while I was still living in Jackson. And I did some programs at Kripalu. Oh, and I went to a yoga institute, which I will not name because I have a story about it. Mm. And didn't like the Swami, had a month there.
Yeah.
But he changed my life with an experience where I went from feeling that I was too poor, would never have enough money didn't know how to move to a different state. I was totally stuck on how to make my dream come true. And he zapped me, and I suddenly knew that Rich wasn't just having health insurance and money, that it was a whole way of being. And it was more like the year I was traveling.
And it was a Shaktiput? He just like bopped you on the head?
No, he stared deep into my eyes angrily.
and you got the Shaktiput through that.
Well, I made a joke the first time. So I'll tell you a little bit about this piece.
I mean, let me stop you for a second. The only reason I'm probing you is because even just this week on the show, I had someone talking about the Ashtanga school and Sharat's passing, and just like the way that you're describing these experiences that you're having, that kind of are what have fueled you being in yoga all these years.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't happen readily these days. That's what I mean. People coming into yoga these days don't have Shaktiputs like people used to in the 70s and the 80s.
Right. Well, this was, let's see, when did I go to that institute? It was before I left. It was 89. Because, what he did was I'd ranted at him at the wall the night before. I mean, the essence of him. Because I'd been there a month and I hadn't got the transformation I wanted. And I realized after a month I'd been in kirtan and we weren't allowed to dance at this ashram. And to kirtan or anything. And I went to my room and I sang and I was really angry. I got really angry. And so I sort of cussed him out into the wall and said, I haven't got what I came for. And I said to the wall, I want my multi-million-dollar moment. And then after a pause, I said, and I've only got a couple of days, so you better find me. I'm not coming to put myself at your feet or to grovel. You're going to find me, is what I said. And then I laughed my head off because I'd never been that audacious or outspoken. But of course, it was just to the wall. And the next day I was doing my karma yoga and I had all these towels on a trolley, and he walked around the corner and he marched up to me and he said, "Lady, you're very, very rich." And I laughed because I was so embarrassed, and I turned my head and I looked at my towels, and to diffuse the intensity, I said, "Yes, I'm rich in towels," thinking he'd laugh. And he glared and got even closer, right up in my eyes, and I had this sensation. Bear in mind, I still don't know a lot, well, I don't know much at all about the finer points of yoga. I had these sensations in my forehead, and I saw an image of the old-fashioned clocks with the gears and wheels, and it was like he had a little pick and he was moving them around. That was my visual image or my interpretation. And he said it then again, "Lady, you're very, very rich." And rich to me, coming from England, was sort of like a rude word, rich bitch. But, so when he said it the second time it went in, I turned away again and I saw my colourful socks and I thought, well, I'm rich in socks. And then I thought, well, I'm rich in T-shirts. And it went on and all day. Well, I'm rich in this. I'm rich in resourcefulness. I'm rich in... And it was transformative. It was for the rest of up until now, it's been being half full instead of half empty. And I mean, even though I didn't like him at all, he gave me a really, really big gift. And...
I mean, even just to stop you again for a second, it's an interesting story to me because it's an example of some of these figures and teachers that were kind of like the yoga masters who were authorities and wisdom holders in some regards. They were such mixed bags. Like,
oh, absolutely.
The way that you sort of like, you get a gift, but then they were also horrible and did terrible things. It's like hard to kind of reconcile sometimes.
Yes, I remember somewhere reading a parigraha, the way they talked about it was awareness of abundance and fulfillment. And that to me kind of nails it, as opposed to the word rich. I had that awareness of it in my own being, in my own feist, my own determination, my courage, it was all there. And I went back to Jackson and I was gone within the month. My last job was a grant and it had finished. And I had an interview to do teacher training stuff somewhere and I didn't want to do it. So I left and I headed off to find this niche where I could flourish as a yoga teacher. And I went next to Satchidananda Ashram. Well, I was traveling. I didn't want to be in a Motel 6 on Christmas Day. So I had on the old Rand McNally map, these 3 different ashrams circled.
I'm laughing at the Rand McNally maps.
Yes.
They don't even, nobody has maps anymore, like paper maps. I used to have them.
Maps. I love maps. I miss maps. So I went there for a silent retreat. Swami Satchidananda was still alive. I stayed there for a retreat. I had sworn off men after my second divorce, and they say whatever it is that you need to work on comes up when you go to the ashram, right? So I'm going there for this silent retreat to contemplate where I'm going to move to, how I'm going to have this new lifestyle without partnership with a man, focusing on my own stuff. So I immediately fall madly in quotes, in love, close quotes, with this chiropractor. And, we were entangled for like 7 or 8 days. Every time I'd look up, it was hell. And one day we were meditating and I completely surrendered to it. I mean, I completely surrendered to it and it was gone. But, I mean, I was looking in the mirror saying, mirror, mirror on the wall, I mean, I was like, and of course we went for a walk right at the end of the retreat. He was the most boring man I'd ever talked to.
You turned him into all kinds of things, huh? Yes.
It was my teaching. When you go to an ashram, you don't know what's going to come at you. And I would say that up to that point, I'd probably been a bit of a romance addict. It was like one romance after another. And that's what I had to work on, and was able then to get on with my own life without being encumbered by having to go to another place to follow a man, So anyway, that was, and then I met somebody there. I met the one yoga teacher in Raleigh at that retreat, at that ashram. And when we could talk at the last meal, we connected, and he was there with a student, and the student had just got divorced, and she said, if you come to Raleigh, you can stay with me for a while. And she made my first yoga flyer, the old-fashioned yoga flyer on yellow paper. And I arrived in January of 1990, and by March of 1990, I was set and teaching classes. The Quaker thing, way opens, well, everything just opened. It just plopped into synchronicity. A woman who was a Feldenkrais teacher here was she had a new studio. She wanted someone to share it. So I did that. I mean, there was only one yoga teacher. And
let me stop you for a second.
Yeah.
I mean, it brings us to an interesting point. I mean, first of all, just so I got it straight. So I guess you had already started doing some yoga teaching before you went to the ashram and met the folks from Raleigh.
Yes.
When did you start teaching yoga? While you were still doing the other educational stuff?
In Jackson, I had a once a week class I taught at a health spa on Saturday mornings for a while, when I was taking with Janie, but I wasn't, in those days, nobody seemed to worry about being certified. And then
there was no such thing.
No, probably not. And then on Fridays, I taught a yoga class for the teachers after school Friday. But after I came back from being with Ganga and Tracy, that's when I started my own class in the church.
Okay,
but
now in your classes,
my livelihood.
In the classes that you were teaching early on,
yes,
what were they like? What were you teaching?
I was trying to teach what I'd learned at teacher training, which nobody
from Kripalu, you mean, or no? That's later.
No. Sorry.
So it's Kundalini yoga.
Well, no, it was kind of Ashtanga yoga, jumping in and out of sun flow type things with lots of chaturanga, lots of lunges, ujjayi breathing. And the people that came, it was totally inappropriate for them. And I was really disappointed. Yeah. So that's when I had to sort of really simplify it and make it basic. Then when I went, I was still taking yoga with Janie, doing the Iyengar yoga. Mm-hmm. Then I went to Kripalu, and did something. It was movement meditation or something. And it was very fluid and wiggly and sensual. And I fell in love with that.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was always a mix of at least those things.
Right. Everybody was hybriding different stuff, Did you just call it Hatha?
Let me think. Well, Iyengar was called Iyengar.
Right.
And when I first came to Raleigh, I went to the workshops of all the Iyengar teachers that came to this area, for weekend workshops. So I still was studying a lot of alignment details, but I was weaving in I used to think, oh my God, is this really yoga? Because I'd weave in a movement meditation like Qigong type movement meditation, or I'd weave in a little Feldenkrais, or I'd weave in other things that came through me in my practice. Mm-hmm. But I didn't really have my own teacher anymore. And I'd think, oh my God, is this really yoga? But then I got clear. Oh, and I took a month with Angela Farmer and Victor Van Houten in Greece, and got a substitute for a month.
Yeah.
I don't know how I had the courage, the nerve, or the money, but I did it.
Was that when they had really broken from Iyengar, or were they still doing Iyengar stuff? Because I had them on the show and they talked about animal tails and stuff.
It was well after they'd separated. They had their own center in one of the Greek islands. Let's see, was it Molivos? What was the name of the island? I think Molivos was the name of the town. I can't remember the island. Anyway, and so it was very much, because I think Angela did some Middle Eastern dance, belly dance somewhere when they moved away. And I remember she said, if you don't get this, get into the ocean and feel the waves. And I sat in the water and I felt that rocking. And that's when the last line of my yoga blessing, we say, came up, because the last line was, may our bodies be strong, relaxed, and may our hearts be full. May our lives be, I don't remember. I can't say
You probably said it a million times. Isn't that funny? I do the same thing. I have a thing I say, and then when you have to tell someone for some reason, you can't remember, even though you say it a million times in your life.
I was trying to say the last line, and I can't seem to say the last line without...
Well, say the whole thing. Say the whole thing.
Well, the first three were from Janie. May our bodies be strong, relaxed, and healthy. May our minds be calm, clear, and serene. May our hearts be filled with love. I said loving kindness. Instead of loving kindness. And then what I got in the water was, and may our lives be in harmony with our true inner spirit.
Yeah, beautiful. Mine is, may all beings be free from suffering. May our practice contribute to peace. And may we have the strength and courage to overcome any obstacles that lay before us.
Oh, beautiful. I love that second line. May our practice, what was it?
Contribute to peace.
Contribute. Oh, I love that. May our practice contribute to peace. I might steal that.
Isn't that interesting? That was always a common, I had a teacher who did similar thing, you called them whatever, seed thoughts, right? Or there was or a little thing. And what's funny is I've been saying that same thing for the last 30 years at the end of every class. I came up with it at the very beginning, and I never really thought of it as a prayer, but it definitely is a prayer.
Yes. Yes. It's a prayer, it's an affirmation, it's an invitation. It's beautiful. I really love that contribute to peace. May the practice, because that's the thing, is it's one thing to go to a class once or twice a week, but to develop your own practice, which is, for me, where I've learned so much. And one of my delights is if I'm doing my own practice and I think, oh, that's what Janie meant all those years ago. Or, oh, if I move my navel a little more that way, such and such opens, and I have these little insights or a phrase or a sound. And that can keep me happy teaching for weeks because I can weave it in different ways. Right. And so that's what keeps it juicy for me. Because to me, it's a miracle that after 35 years, I still love it, my own practice and teaching.
Well, isn't that the thing? That's why I'm speaking to you, because there's something that keeps the spark going, right? There's, like you saying, finding those little keys or the little thing that's interesting to you to be exploring, to kind of keep that sense of awe like you had when you were a kid or whatever, right?
Exactly. And I say those, I say those prayers that Jamie said, or those seed thoughts, I don't know, sometimes several times a day when I do practice or when I sit down to eat or, different times. So they get so embodied. They get so much a part of who you are.
Right. Okay, so you go from the ashram back to Raleigh, North Carolina with the folks that you just met there. That person lets you have a couch to crash on, and they make a flyer for you.
Right. She was a CEO of a company, so she had a laptop, which was like
the early laptops, eh?
And she printed out this yellow flyer, and I actually stole the logo from a meditation for children class out of the back of Yoga Journal, cut and pasted it on.
Mm-hmm. Did it say yoga with Judith?
What did it say? It just said yoga classes.
Yeah, okay.
Yoga classes.
Yeah.
Anyway, I built up to 7 classes really quickly.
Yeah, now, so you said you were doing it at a church, because I always say...
Oh, no, not once I went to Raleigh. Once I went to Raleigh, I shared space with Mary Cochran, who was the Feldenkrais guru. Feldenkrais as a movement modality for healing, very subtle and internal. And I shared with her different nights. And so for 8 years, she had a studio until they decided to knock all the buildings down and build some fancy, expensive condominiums.
Right.
And then I found a few different places. But I've taught in the same spaces for many years. I didn't get a studio because... Yeah,
I was going to ask, did you take on a lease ever, or no, you just paid like per class for the spaces?
I am so grateful. See, my yoga teachers didn't. So I didn't have that as a goal. Well, that's not true. The one guy that was teaching yoga in Raleigh had the Raleigh Yoga Center, which he was an Iyengar style teacher. I don't know if he was fully certified Iyengar. So what was I saying? Oh, studios. So there weren't really studios. There was his, but everybody I knew, because I started a sort of support group for yoga teachers when I first moved here, and there were 13 between here and a town 40 miles away. It was hardly anyone. So we tended to just rent spaces or teach at the Y or whatever. So I taught there, and then I was really clear that I did not want a yoga studio unless I had a partner who liked to do all the maintenance stuff, which I hated. And so luckily I didn't. Plus, Ganga White said something that for me has turned out to be untrue, but it's what made me want to teach. And he said, if you're a yoga teacher, you can always get substitute teachers and go off and travel. Well, I did that month with Angela and that, but I ended up really working very hard teaching all my classes and didn't go off and travel much. But I just rented spaces, and I'm so glad. And then when all the studios popped up, I'm like, I take 2 weeks off in between each session. They have classes even on Thanksgiving Day. What am I going to do? So I was really a bit worried about my business, but luckily...
Okay, so wait, I'm interested in that, because this goes to what I was saying at the very beginning, like the kind of evolution of things, because it was like church basements and for a long time, and then people did start opening centers.
Yes.
So for a while, you were saying you were just renting space and teaching a couple classes a week in Raleigh. There wasn't that many yoga teachers.
It wasn't a couple. I taught 2 90-minute classes back to back, Monday night, Wednesday night, sometimes Thursday night, 2 on Sunday, and 2 Wednesday morning at one point.
Right. Well...
And they were all 90-minute classes with half an hour in between, because I thought, if I'm going to go out and drive there and get the space set up or whatever, if I teach 2 classes, that's only one evening. And I was wanting to do this as my livelihood, not knowing if it was humanly possible.
Well, see, that's the thing. In the 1990s, there was probably a bunch of people coming to both classes.
They were full. I had waiting lists at one point.
See, that's the thing, because that's right. I consider that right, like at the beginning of the wave really picking up steam.
Yes.
Because I remember I stumbled into my first class into like 90, 92. I was teaching in 94, 95. And that's really just, you just caught that wave, and there was a lot of opportunities. I had private students, all the classes were filling up at all the
Right.
places, lots of yoga centers were opening up.
Can I ask who you did your training with? Was it Gary? Gary
No, I know
As
you were going to say Gary Crafts. I mean, I did like workshops with Gary, but I mostly did training with a woman named Allison West. She's like a New York teacher
Okay.
that folks around here would know. She had studied Iyengar method and Ashtanga and Shivananda, and she had a background as an art history
Mm-hmm.
teacher. So she like was kind of like a knowledge file. She just knew all the stuff. So I studied with her for many years. And then
Mm.
I studied with a student of Jessica Charge named Mark Whitwell for a while.
Mm. Okay.
And so, yeah, I studied, and then I just sort of did the New York yoga scene, like Jiva Mukti for a long time. And
Uh-huh.
then ultimately I went in a total Desikachar direction. So I teach Warrior 3 exactly the same way that you teach it.
Oh.
No,
Oh
I mean
yeah,
literally bending the standing leg, just picking the foot up 1 inch that you're in the
yes.
pose. Like I literally do exactly the same way as you. So I moved in that direction. It's a long story that people who listen to the show have heard me say, but basically, my mom passed away when I was 16. And at some point I said, I want to be able to teach a class that my mom could come to.
Oh,
And
yeah.
that really just like shaped me in terms
Yeah.
of what I wanted to teach. And that was very much against the grain because, as you know, at that time, as things did get more popular, power yoga became all the
Yes.
rage.
Yes. I was influenced by Jessica Child's style.
Mm.
Towards the end of my time in Jackson, I went a couple of times to Atlanta and a couple of times to a retreat in Georgia, I think, with a couple. Their last name was Pierce. He was Martin Pierce,
Mm.
and Jessica Child was his teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And what I loved was the moving on the breath, the repetition.
Mm-hmm.
What worried me was the not having the alignment details because I'm like, well, if I do that without, I don't know, pulling my tummy in, I hurt my low back, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I always had that in my mind, the Iyengar or alignment based principles. But, Karina reminded me of it. And I realized that I'll do like a warrior two. I'm using English language because at some point I gave up using both. I'd have some
Mm-hmm.
poses were Sanskrit, some were in English. So I
Mm-hmm.
do, warrior triangle, warrior two, and so on to the side. And then I started doing it like 3 times, like Qigong style, very slow, very fluidly repetitive on the breath.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I do it that way. And that gave me a lot of credibility to do things like that more,
Mm-hmm.
was that style.
Yeah, I think it's certainly an interesting combination. I think also when you use simpler forms, the Iyengar alignment principles are sometimes not as important depending on what you're doing. Like inhale, arms up, exhale, arms down. I guess you could pick apart shoulder rotation and stuff like that. But these days, most of the people I'm coming in are older in age, like you were saying, like the people in your class tend to be older, and the degree to which it's like for them important to try to like wrap their shoulders or do anything like that. It's interesting how that's evolved for me over the years, like the role of alignment, outside of just like protecting someone. It used to be there was something about trying to accomplish the alignment, and now it's
Right.
only when it's like useful or something.
Right. I tend to, when I'm teaching and I'm skimming, because I don't do a lot of practice some of the time while I'm teaching, because I'm looking at them or walking around. I don't really do assists, adjusts, but I
Mm-hmm.
might just stroke a shoulder or say, may I touch you? And just very lightly touch something rather than put it in a different position.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm looking for is like if someone's got one shoulder up by their ear, or if they're in, let's say, chair pose and their knees are way forward in front of their toes, and I know it's not good for their knees. So I look for what might be hurtful within their bodies. But then I try to respect the form that the body can do.
Mm-hmm.
And I often say, you don't need to look like the centerfold from Yoga Journal.
Right, right,
That's
right.
sort of one of my quips. But
Yeah.
also, if somebody's like internally rotating an arm instead of externally, that might be all they can do. So, like waiting for the moment to just stroke their upper arm to create a bit more space or put my hand above their chest with their permission.
If you are hearing this message, then you're listening to the free version of J. Brown Yoga Talks. To hear the rest of our conversation, please subscribe to Podcast Premium at jbrownyoga.com/premium.